everyone, what's up? My name is Joss and welcome back to my channel Squibbles Reads. So in the month of October, I read a total of 18 books, which was by far my best reading month this year, and also more than all the books that I read in the entire first half of 2017, so needless to say, I'm really happy about it. I decided to split this wrap up into part 1, which you're seeing today, and part 2, which you're going to see on Monday, because I have a lot of thoughts about all of them. I divided up the books so you will be seeing a good variety of reviews in both today's video and Monday's video, so without any further ado, let me review half the books today that I read in October. The first book that I'm going to review is The Good Daughter by Karen Slaughter. This is a mystery thriller about sisters Charlotte and Samantha, and they live in a small town called Pikeville. 28 years ago, there was a really terrible, brutal, violent attack, and their mom, Gamma, died as a result of that attack, and their dad is a notorious defense attorney in Pikeville. So we flash forward 28 years later, and Charlotte herself is also a lawyer, still living in Pikeville, and she's involved in another violent incident. And then a whole spiral starts. There are some secrets dredged up, a lot of people in the town get involved. In my opinion, this is a book that really tries really hard. It confronts a lot of stereotypes, so about like teens who have sex, girls who are sexually active. There is some behind the scenes talk about legal discussion and lawyer-client confidentiality. There is also a character in this book that is transgender. I myself am cisgender, so I do not want to comment on the representation. There is also a character who has physical disabilities and she takes a lot of medications. We see her throughout the book trying to balance all the different types of medications, their effects, their side effects, and how she might modify her day according to what medication she is and isn't taking. We also see how her disabilities affect her day-to-day, even in small tasks that she has to experience. Even though it is a super long book, it flew by. I thought the pacing and the character development was both done really well. I can't say that it was particularly spectacular, but still really, really solid. There was one thing about this book that I was not okay with. So this author is really knowledgeable in statistics, forensic science, and science. You can really tell in the way that she writes and all the terminology that she uses. However, there was this one line that she used that I was not okay with, and the line is, "There were 2 bruises, one under each eye, that made her look like a domestic violence victim." And it was really peculiar to me because this author is really knowledgeable, or presents as really knowledgeable, but she should know that a lot of domestic violence cases go unreported and undetected. And if this is the case, how can you really tell what a domestic violence victim looks like? And it also diminishes the experience of a domestic violence victim in the same way that when people say, oh, I'm super OCD, just in a way that appropriates the term in relation to the fact that they like things neat and tidy, it diminishes the experience of people who are actually domestic violence victims. So I was not okay with this line, and just note that that is in here if you are going to read this book. There is also content warnings for sexual assault, rape, trauma, violence, all of that. It is extremely graphic, so if you're sensitive to that, I would stay away from this one. But all in all, I did give this book 3.5 stars. The next books that I read are 2 books in a duology. The first one is River of Teeth, and the second one is Taste of Marrow by Sarah Gailey. This is a super fun romp into early 20th century alternate history in the States, where the US government had this plan to import hippos as an alternative meat source, and they were going to be put in the marshlands of Louisiana to be bred and slaughtered. In this book, this does happen, but the hippos take over the marshes and they become wild and feral hippos, and they start causing trouble. There are some evil people with dastardly plans for the hippos, and then there is another team of cowboys, con artists, there is a demolitions expert, and some other people who are in our group of protagonists. In our protagonist team, there are queer characters, there's fat representation, there's a pregnant character, people of color, there is a non-binary character that is kind of in a flirtationship with another man. This first book, River of Teeth, was basically all plot with a little teensy bit of backstory. It was super fast moving, there was not really any peaks or valleys, it was all just go, go, go. But the second book, Taste of Marrow, had a lot more backstory. You really learn a lot more about the characters and why they took the actions that they did in the first book, and for that reason, I gave the first book 3 stars, and then I gave the second book 3.5 stars. They are super fun. They have a ton of minority group representation. I do wish they had been a little bit longer, but if you are looking for something really unique, definitely would recommend them. The next book I read was Moonstone, The Boy Who Never Lived by Shion and translated by Victoria Cribb. This is one of the books that I chose for my Spookathon, Autumn Readathon, and Dewey's 24-hour readathon TBRs. I wanted to do 3 readathons in 2 weeks, so if you're interested in what the other books were that I wanted to read but didn't necessarily get to. I will link that in the card up above. But anyways, this little novella, it is set in the year 1918 in the city of Reykjavik in Iceland. Our main character is a 16-year-old boy named Mani. He is gay and he really loves movies and films. During this time, there is a Spanish influenza pandemic in the city, and Iceland was also becoming an independent nation, so a lot of change during this time period. There is also a volcano erupting, there is a coal shortage, which causes a lot of problems because they use coal for fuel. The film industry becomes significant because the disease was killing a lot of artists, musicians, and actors. There also just wasn't enough people to fill the jobs in the film industry. And eventually, theaters closed down as well. There is an underlying theme of escapism that is trapped in all of these things. Mani himself uses sex as a way to earn money and also a way to escape. This is juxtaposed in how people kind of use movies and films as a way to escape what is happening to them in the real world. Before going into this book, I was told that it seems like a dream almost, but it is set in reality, and I think the writing is really what makes it kind of that airy, flowy feel. That was a super interesting contrast because the atmosphere is really chilly. There are people dying, people getting really sick. Overall, I enjoyed experiencing Iceland in another book. The only other book that I've read that's set in Iceland is Burial Rites by Hannah Kent right there. It is one of my favorite books of all time. I also really enjoyed Mani's character development, and we got to see how he experienced different parts of his identity. So his age, he is 16, and also the fact that he is gay during this time, and how he felt really out of place in society, and how he used film and movies and the different aspects of film and movies to help himself just cope with all the change that's going on and how he fits in society. On top of that, I really liked the exploration of the themes and also that we got to see some of Iceland's history, so overall I did give this one 4 stars. The next book is also one that was on that TBR that I just mentioned, and that book is United States of Japan by Peter Tierjes-Liu. This takes place in an alternate history where the United States has been defeated by Japan in World War II and is now being taken over by Japan and is called the United States of Japan. So we start out this book in the year 1948, and the Japanese army is rescuing Japanese Americans that have been held in internment camps. Then we fast forward 40 years into the year 1988, and we meet this guy. His name is Ben, his full name is Beniko, and his job is to censor video games. When he was a kid, he revealed to the government that his parents committed treason, and as a result of that, his parents died by suicide, and on one hand, people commend him because he admitted and revealed the truth that his parents had committed this act, but on the other hand, they were like, how could you betray your family and cause your family so much grief and sorrow and stress? So on one hand, they laud him, and on the other hand, they kind of question his trust and his motives. Ben in this book is a really paranoid dude, so he kind of is always looking over his shoulder, always double checking his work. He thinks the government is always looking on him, and he's afraid to do any even little thing that opposes the government. We also meet Akiko. She is part of the secret police, and she is kind of the total personality opposite of Ben. She is not paranoid whatsoever. She is extremely self-assured, really confident, and she is really loyal to the government at this time. The plot revolves around this video game that starts to get popular, and in this video game, it's like an alternate history where the US defeats Japan in World War II, and this game is seen as a threat and treacherous to the Empire. So Ben and Akiko have to work together to try and figure out who or what is behind this video game. A big topic in this book is like loyalty and deception. We see multiple times what extent people are going to remain loyal to the government and what secrets they're keeping and what emotions are underneath that. The cover does imply that there will be mecha battles with large robots, and there was definitely a healthy dose of that, but what I really got from this book is it is kind of an alternate dystopian society, and we get that feeling of bleakness and helplessness and kind of like, what do I do and who's watching me? And that's something that took me by surprise, is all the exploration around that kind of stuff. I was kind of just expecting battles and video games and big robots, and I don't love mecha anime, so I was a little hesitant going into this one, but I really enjoyed it. It surprised me, and I gave it 3.75 stars. The next book is actually the book that I buddy read with Russell from Ink and Paper Blog from my last video. This is kind of how we met, is we started buddy reading this book together. I will also leave his full review in the down bar below if you want to check that out, but this book is Mossy by Jennifer Matthew. We follow our protagonist Viv, and she's a high school student in a small town high school in Texas. And at this high school, the football team is treated like royalty. There are incidences with a dress code where the girls are told to cover up because they're a distraction to boys. There's harassment. There is all this unfair treatment towards the girls that go to the school. Viv's mom was also involved in this group of women called Riot Girls back in her day, and Viv creates an anonymous feminist zine at her high school called Mossy. It promotes empowerment, for girls at their high school. It promotes questioning these things like the dress code and different rules that they have at this school. And pretty soon they start standing up to the things like the dress code, the harassment, and the unequal treatment. I thought that this book was really powerful. It was really positive. There was this boy that kind of stepped up to the plate. He began to understand that feminism does not equate man-hating. But on the other hand, we also got to see that it was hard for him because it's like, why are you saying that men are like this? Because I am not personally like this. But he later started to understand that it was more of a systemic thing, things that were ingrained in the rules from the top down, and it was not necessarily about him. Viv's mom was also in a relationship with a guy who had more conservative values. We got to see Viv's frustration with that, but we also got to see Viv's mom making decisions for herself in her own relationship with someone that she didn't necessarily share a bunch of values with, but they made their relationship work. And while that was difficult for Viv to see why that worked, Viv's mom also sorted that out by herself, and there were some good boundaries that were set there. One critique that I have of this book is that there were points in this book where I thought that the author dealt with gender as though it was a construct that was only located in a vacuum and not affected by any other social constructs. So for example, Viv in this book said that she wanted Mossy to be more inclusive of all women as opposed to Riot Girls back in the day with her mom, which was less inclusive. There was another page where intersectionality with a character that was a person of color was explained for about a page in the book, which was great because they acknowledged it. But on the other hand, a good portion of this book really seemed like gender existed in a vacuum and wasn't affected by anything else. Jennifer Matthew also acknowledges in the final acknowledgments of the book that she is influenced by authors who are women of color, who are not of the dominant discourse, and that feminism needs to benefit all women and not just women who are of the dominant discourse. It's one thing to mention and kind of nod at inclusivity, but it's another one to actually build it into the narrative, and I really wish that she had built it more into the narrative instead of just mentioning it for a page or for a moment. Overall, I didn't find anything like problematic or offensive with this book, just that I wish that it honestly had been actually more inclusive like they said they were going to make it, but the message again is still really great. It's very empowering to women and girls, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. And the next book is Far From You by Tess Sharp, which I read for the Girl Sex 101 book club that I am in with Emma from Drinking by Herself and Emma from Emma Tobias. This is a YA thriller about a girl named Sophie. She has been sober for 9 months. She has been in recovery for a drug addiction, and she has lost her best friend Mina in apparently a drug deal gone wrong 9 months ago. But that's just what it appears to be on the surface. Sophie is trying to uncover the mystery of what actually happened that was not a drug deal gone wrong. So this is a book that is told in 3 different timelines, and at the beginning of the book, it goes chronologically. Sophie is also bisexual, and she has some physical injuries and resulting disabilities from an event, so there is representation on both of those fronts. Honestly, I thought the first half of this book was amazing. I was ready for my 4th 5-star book of the year. Then we got into the second half of the book and things started to get a little bit weird. So like I said, there were 3 different timelines and they all were moving chronologically. When we reached kind of the 50% mark, they started moving not chronologically and the time jumps weren't equal. So in my brain, everything started to get a little bit murky. There were also some points in the book that were extremely convenient. Characters just kind of knew that this other character did something, or they knew that this thing happened, or they sensed it. And I'm really not about those convenient moments, especially in mystery books. And in the last third of the book, some characters that were really underdeveloped started to become significant, which is fine, but I didn't have any particular emotion or knowledge of those characters, so I was kind of left with a very detached feeling because they were underdeveloped and they started to play more significant roles, and I was like, I don't even know who you are. So just be warned of that. In the last third, you might want to pay attention to absolutely everyone in this book, even if you think they're not important. There were also some really good points. They discussed the term bisexual and bisexuality and some of the stereotypes and myths that go around about people who identify as bisexual. There is also some good representation of drug addiction and the things that people who are addicts go through. Overall, this book was totally a 5-star book for the first half. The second half kind of wrecked it for me, so overall I gave it 3 stars. The next book I read was Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. I'm not going to talk about this too much because it's really hard for me to talk about this book without giving a ton of spoilers, but I did give it 3 to 3.5 stars, I'd say. I liked collected enough to buy a signed copy, as you can see, which I'm really happy about, because there were definitely some passages in this book that I want to go back and highlight or annotate in some way because they were extremely powerful. But before I get ahead of myself, you guys have probably heard about what this book is about. There's a girl whose name is Aza. She is diagnosed with OCD. She experiences some anxiety, and also there is this like fugitive, missing, runaway billionaire kind of subplot going on. So these passages that I was talking about, I think they explained OCD and anxiety related symptoms really well, especially to readers that may not experience these symptoms or have never experienced these symptoms at all. I think it really puts them in the shoes of people who do experience them. The one major glaring critique that I have of this book is that I listened to the audiobook. The character's best friend called her Holmesy, and she calls her Holmesy so many times, and I don't know if it was the audiobook's narrator or if she actually called her Holmesy so many times, but it started to really irritate me and like impede my enjoyment of this book. And like no one calls another person by their name that much, let alone this like kitschy sort of nickname. And even though he did explain why she did have that nickname, I think it interrupted the flow and the intent of the dialogue. I think it could have been a lot more powerful than it actually was because I was just so annoyed at her calling her Holmesy all the time. Again, those are just some preliminary thoughts. I am saving the rest of my thoughts for an Are These Books Worth the Hype video, and in that video I will have like a spoiler warning thing on the screen for when I'm talking about spoilers. But if you want to see some more of my spoilery thoughts, I will leave my Goodreads review linked down below if you want to read those. But yeah, overall this was a 3 to 3.5 star book. The last book that I'm going to review for you is the October pick and the first book for the Storytime with Squibbles book club, which is a book club that I run primarily on Goodreads with a focus on books that feature marginalized characters that are written by authors of the same or similar marginalized groups. I will leave that link in the down bar below. But my pick was Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. This is a book that is set in Nigeria, mainly in the late 1980s, and we have a couple whose names are Yejide and Akin. And during this time in Nigeria, it is customary for one husband to take multiple wives, and these relationships are called polygamous, as opposed to polyamorous. And during my live show that I did for this book on my Instagram, I kind of discussed a little bit of the term polygamy as versus polyamory, and a little bit of investigation as to why they decided to use this term in the book. Yejide and Akin have decided that they would like to be in a monogamous relationship. However, one day this woman shows up on their doorstep and she's like, hey, I'm Akin's second wife, and Yejide is like, WTF, what is going on? Yejide and Akin are also struggling to get pregnant. They really want to have kids. So Yejide tries a whole bunch of different things that are bedded in myths and traditions. So I really adored this book. So my plan was to have an Instagram live for the Storytime with Squibbles book every month, and I expected it to be like 20-30 minutes. I ended up talking about this book and unpacking the themes in it for an hour, and after I did that live show, I developed a much greater appreciation of what Ayobami Adebayo was trying to do here. So one of the major themes in the book that I'm going to talk about is how men ultimately have power over women's bodies and how that was illustrated here. So the parallel that I can draw to it in our world now is that a lot of men are policymakers, and something that these policies affect is women's access and women's rights to birth control. And we see parallels and symbols of how this comes up in this society. Even when women are trying to have control over their bodies, their sexual nature, and their relationships, men ultimately are manipulating it and having the say of it at the core. And we see how Yejide and other women in this book become kind of products of that, and the anger and the resentment and the sense of helplessness that can result. Like I mentioned, husbands are typically having multiple wives. They are in polygamous relationships. However, when women try and have multiple partners, it is looked upon in a different way. Even though women aren't supposed to have multiple partners in the society, there's definitely a stigma and a judgment. There is also a topic of grief that kind of permeates this book. I won't get into why that permeates the book, but it is kind of a sense of sadness and what can happen when people are not allowed to or are pressured to move on very quickly and take actions instead of actually processing their feelings and grieving. We also see some of the political unrest and perhaps civil unrest in Nigeria at this time, and switching between different leaders and what that means for the characters and their movement in the book, which I thought was really interesting. Something that I really liked about this that people were talking about in the live show and in the group was that a lot of kind of literary fiction is very focused on the characters and every little inch of their movements. However, there were points in this book that the plot twisted and I was like, oh my gosh, or like something was revealed and I was like, is this actually happening? So I think it is pretty balanced between plot and characters, which I really liked. It kept this book moving. I mean, it is really short, but that definitely did keep the movement going. Overall, when I finished this book, I thought I would give it 4 stars. The more I talked about it during the live show, the more I unpacked it, the more people kind of challenged what I was talking about, the more I started to peel the layers of this book. And I think this book is absolutely beautiful. It's one that I want to read again. I'm going to give it 5 stars, and I'm really scared because the rest of the picks for Storytime with Squibbles, I don't know if I can guarantee you guys a 5-star book, but I thought this was amazing, and I'm definitely going to reread it. So that is it for part 1 of my October wrap-up. Again, I will include about the same number of books in my part 2 on Monday. Let me know what your guys' favorite book was that you read in the month of October down in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye!